Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we've got two more recent releases that we're going to be reviewing. And a little bit, we'll be looking at the French science fiction drama thriller thing with Léa Seydoux, The Beast. But first, we're going to be talking about a recent A24 movie that's not a high concept science fiction or horror movie, Janet Planet. Janet Planet is the feature film debut of Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Annie Baker. Enthralled by her own imagination, 11-year-old Lacey spends the long summer at home with her mother and three strangers. Very simplified description of this movie. So Annie Baker, as I said, a playwright, and has won the Pulitzer for a play called The Flick, which is about three ushers at a rundown movie theater and the conversations they have. This is her directorial debut. One of the things I found out is that for at least going back to 2017, I'm going to guess prior to that as well, she has been a Jewish person. Yeah, she's been a Jewish person speaking out for Palestinians and against the Israeli state. So that made me like her even more. So Ariana, what did you think of Janet Planet?
I feel like this is going to be one of those like little gems of films when we're talking about mainly a female cast and in some sense has a layer of nostalgia without going too deep into it.
It's not rose-colored nostalgia.
Exactly. I really like this child, Lacey. She's not like a perfect child.
She's a very fucked up kid.
Yeah, she is fucked up. And then the more you kind of get to know her mother, the more you start to understand why this child has the anxieties that they do. And it's not as if like this is like a very like neurotic child. She's just
at one point she does say to her mother, "My life is hell."
Yes.
That seems pretty neurotic. And like the opening of the movie is her calling her mother because she wants to come home from summer camp because she feels like she can't make friends, and convincing her mother by saying, I'll kill myself if you don't come pick me up. And then her mother picks her up after she's told her bunkmates, and they've all kind of surrounded her and shown her all this love. And they're right at the car, and she tells her mom, "I want to stay." And her mom is like, "You can't. I have lied for you." So I would say she is a very neurotic child.
The fact of like it's not the typical Hollywood like neurotic.
It's a realistic, it's a grounded neurosis.
It's not the neurotic of, oh my god, I have so many allergies and here looks.
It's neurotic, it's not quirky.
Yes. And it's also just this inappropriate relationship she has with her mother.
Well, I mean, the title of the film, Janet Planet,
yeah,
is a reference to the fact that everything revolves around Janet.
Yeah.
And her daughter just kind of exists in the orbit of her mother.
Yes. And it is this thing of it being like, this is a summer in where it can cause, I'm not saying like it can cause like different traumas, but they're not like abusive traumas. It is just a parent that is just a little bit too self-involved. And they're not willing to push their kid to go out to be a child.
Well, they seem kind of disinterested in being a parent most of the time.
Yes. And it's also this poor kid, Lacey, who just apparently has no friends and doesn't understand why. And you kind of understand why she doesn't understand why. I think because she's like a miniature adult.
Well, her mother doesn't really afford her opportunities to be around children her age that often. Like camp was like one of the few times she had, and which is why she became so overwhelmed when she got there. The structure of the film is interesting. It's a triptych, and it's structured around three people that come in and out of their lives.
Yes.
So there is Wayne, who is a man that is shacking up with Janet during the summer while Lacey is gone. There is Regina, who's an old friend who's been reunited with Janet. And then there is Avi, who's kind of a guru figure in the arts community. They kind of revolve around.
Yeah.
And like at one point, somebody even kind of is trying to make excuses as to why he's not a cult leader. And I feel like when you have to start saying why someone's not a cult leader, bad things. I read an interesting review where someone said, because the triptych situation is set up where the name of the person will come on screen, and then when their role in the film is done, it'll have like their name end, right?
Mhm.
So a review I read said that when Avi's name came up on the screen, the audience audibly groaned because by that point, that's the last person. You kind of know Janet and you understand why things are so fucked up. So then when Avi comes around, you're like, God damn it, why are you doing? You know this is not going to end well.
Yeah.
Like we already see how everything's going to go. And I think that's very interesting that Julianne Nicholson, who's been in a lot of things, she's a character actress who I don't think she's ever really had a major starring role, but she's been in a lot of supporting
I
roles.
feel like we saw her like back to back in the Weird Al movie and then also in the Marilyn Monroe movie.
Yeah, the thing that I remember her from, she was in The Outsider. I think she played Jason Bateman's wife, that
Yeah.
HBO miniseries. I remember her, speaking of Stephen King, Storm of the Century, which was this like original Stephen King work for ABC
Yeah.
and was not very good. But that was the first time I noticed her. And I was like, huh, that actress is a very interesting actress. And then since then, I've kind of seen her pop up in a lot of supporting roles. What did you think of Julianne Nicholson in this lead role?
I thought it was a great role. I think it needed this subtle performances because again, this is not she's not a terrible person, but because she kind of lives in this isolation, she's not receptive to feedback. And therefore her child ends up being a sounding board, which is not what you
Oh, we'll talk about
want
some
her
of
to
the
be.
sounding. I think it was interesting that they cast Julianne Nicholson because she's 53 in real life. I don't think they ever really give us what age Janet is meant to be, but I would assume she's older.
Yeah.
So we're also dealing with an older mom because Lacey is 11.
Yeah.
So Janet at most probably had her in her mid to late 30s.
Yes.
So Janet was very established. And is there ever discussion of dad? I don't remember him being mentioned at all.
No, there's no mention of dad. There is like this mention of it seems as if like her habit is she dates older guys.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think probably like maybe age appropriate guys. If she's 53, these guys aren't that much older than her, I don't think.
yeah, it's just like the like one guy was like, oh, he like moved so and so to be closer to his grandchildren.
Wayne, yeah.
And I don't know if it was no, she wasn't talking about Wayne. She was
Oh,
saying
just some guy we never
like,
know. Yeah.
some guy that we never know. So there, it's almost like that could have been the implication of Lacey's dad, but it's not like detailed any further.
Yeah, that's the vibe I got when she said that.
It was like,
Yeah, now that I
she was
remember.
with him for 3 years, and then suddenly she changed her life, which I did like those little details of like before she became a mom, it seemed as if like her life was even more out of sorts than it is
She's a
now.
very messy person.
Yes.
She's also an acupuncturist by trade, which
Yes.
a job like that is not picked, I think, arbitrarily, because I think when you have someone as an acupuncturist, you're also using that as a way to talk about how the audience is probably going to perceive this person. Because if you tell me you're an acupuncturist, I'm gonna be like, oh, you're like a quack. Right? Like that's what I'm gonna think. I think a lot of people probably think that acupuncture, is that what it is? Acupuncture is just not seen as like a legit medical thing. It's a fringe kind of like, I mean, I guess if it helps you, great, but I don't think it will. I think it's kind of silly. But I mean, maybe there's some science behind it. I don't know. But for a white woman in Massachusetts, rural Massachusetts, doing acupuncture, it's a very white appropriation type of thing. She We'll talk about the structure of the film a little bit, the way it feels. There were, for someone that works in the theater, I was very impressed with how many close-ups are in this movie, which if you think of, theatrical films, we typically don't, or films based on stage plays, we don't typically see them cinematized that often.
No.
And so it's interesting to see Baker, who's never directed a film before, do such a good job with the technical aspects of it and understand that in this medium, those close-ups are an important way of communicating information, and that it's a very different medium than theater work.
Yes.
So that there's a certain confidence there, a certain understanding of film versus theater that is present in the film, like from scene one.
Yeah.
There are, so I saw someone talk about that Baker is known for her pregnant pauses in the theater. And pregnant pauses are just a reference to it's a silence full of potential in the way a pregnant body is full of a new human being, right?
Yeah.
And I think she uses the camera in the same way she might use a pause in the theater. There's a particular scene between Janet and Regina where there is a pause and then a reveal.
Yes.
I won't get into details about what it is, but I will just say that Ariana laughed harder at that moment than any other moment in this movie. And I think that conveyed to me, oh, she understands that the frame is the same thing as dialogue in a theater play.
Yeah.
That when you're in the theater, you can't hide things from the audience unless you're hiding it through what people say.
Or it's also like the play with lighting, right?
Yeah.
I can imagine by the scene that we're talking about is that there's a spotlight.
But I don't think it works as well on stage. I think in terms of film and the way you keep something out of frame,
I know, but
I think it works really well.
It's a playfulness while also being very smart about it. Because as we were watching it, we were just thinking like, Wes Anderson feels afterwards. I was just like, it felt very, European, more towards like French, almost like Varda style.
I would say, and I saw some comparisons to this, and I think I kind of agree. Bergman.
Yes.
People were saying Persona, scenes from a marriage. People also pointed out Chantal Akerman, and we've only seen one of her films, Jean Dumont, but like that film in the way Akerman uses, and having read about her more than have seen her work yet, I know that she examines her mother's life in order to examine herself.
Yes.
And I think that's a lot of what's going on here. It's looking back at probably a version of Baker's mother or a version of a woman that Baker has known. It could have been a friend's mom. It could have been an aunt. Who knows? But this sort of messy bohemian woman who will sometimes have these moments of clarity, but it never seems to take root and is stuck in these sort of cycles of destructive behavior that aren't like going to ruin her life, but there's certain, it feels like she's idling in the driveway. She just can't get anywhere.
Yeah, it's as if like she already made a big push before, right? She started a new career, it seems like, what, 5 or 6 years ago, which we're assuming it's the acupuncture thing. That means she also made that huge decision of having a child beforehand and probably struggled as a single mother before she found like solid work. It's someone that before they can make that change, it has to be a big one. And because it's small changes, she's not willing to partake in it yet.
Yeah, so like changes are we pack up and we move and we start over in a whole new place kind of a thing. Rather than let's just make adjustments to where we're at and make this work rather than spend all this money, take all this risk.
Well, it's also displaying on the way that she treats her daughter, right?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna have a conversation with Lacey on how maybe that she should try harder to make friends or give it time or be like, hey, can you give it a week? Instead, immediately swoops in, does what it's needed, but then won't take responsibility or even defend her, as we see in the movie.
Yeah.
It is this thing that like the arguments that she's having with the other adults has nothing to do with Lacey. And however, it's not as if like anyone's concerned about her child.
Yeah.
And the other adults don't even interact with her that much. And when they do, because Lacey has gone through what she's gone through, she is now kind of like, yeah, I don't want to get close to you.
Yeah. So let's talk about each of the 3 people that comes through their lives. Will Patton, who has been in a ton of things, most recently was in Outer Range. I've almost purged the name from my memory now that they've canceled the show after season 2. Will Patton, fantastic character actor.
Yes.
Incredible in everything he does. And like this role, different than I've ever seen him do. Completely different than his role in Outer Range, where in Outer Range he's this pompous asshole.
Yeah.
And here he's this very quiet, brooding, disturbed man
Yeah.
who isn't violent, but there's always this like potential that something's gonna happen.
It's underlining. Like he feels scary and intimidating. And I could understand that to some perspective. Like my mom didn't have a lot of boyfriends, but when like between that and like having uncles, there's always like these rules that you don't know about when you're supposed to be handling them that no one tells you about, and then they're upset that you've like broken or crossed that barrier. And I think about that a lot with Lacey with her experience with him. Like she asks him a ton of questions and like he doesn't want to answer, or he's not feeling well, he wants her to be quiet.
Well, when she asks the questions, it's not that he says I don't want to answer it. He just ignores that she even asked the question.
Yeah.
Which is very like strange the first time it happens. There's a really great sequence where Lacey is introduced to Wayne's daughter Susanna, I think, and he doesn't have any sort of regular custody of this girl. They meet up with her at a food court in a mall.
Yeah.
And they get to hang out with her for a few hours, and then they drop her off at her house. And that's when Lacey asks, "Why doesn't Susanna live with you, like at all?"
Like even part-time. She's like, why don't even part of the time?
And then like Wayne doesn't answer. And I would say later we get a sense of why that might be without giving any spoilers of what happens. But it does seem like there is something wrong with Wayne.
Yeah.
That Wayne is not getting addressed professionally.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I get the sense he's a military veteran.
Yeah, there is
because his son's in Iraq. This is set in 91.
Yeah.
And so his son is serving in Desert Storm. And there's an implication that he was also in the war. So it's clear that there's some like PTSD going on. What did you think of what Wayne added to the story? What do you think his role in it was?
I think what it was is in a sense of like the mom dating someone where she is saving that person. He's shacking up with her. It's not as if like, oh, Wayne has his own place and Wayne only comes over like on the weekends. And
then when he gets the migraine that lasts all day, and she makes the comment of, yeah, he thinks I gave it to him because I had a migraine the other day.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's an insane thing to say about a headache.
And I think it doesn't help that maybe because she's sort of hippy-dippy-ish, she's not like going like, no. She's probably just going like, yeah, probably, whatever. And it's this thing of it just being like the connections that she's making, Janet, the mom, it's with people that she has like the ability to be above them when you think about it. Yes,
she owns a very nice house.
Yes.
She has a job that probably pays her way more than it probably should. I forgot his daughter is Sequoia. That's her name. Which that name's, once I realized that's what it was, I was like, that's such an odd name. And also, he has a son who's 20 in the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Or in a Desert Storm. And we have Sequoia, who is about 11. She's Lacey's age. Wayne is clearly, late 50s, early 60s, somewhere in there. And to have a daughter that's so much younger, and then we never see her mom. We see Sequoia get dropped off at her house. There's all these little pieces of things that you can infer from all of this that Wayne has probably, and that there's a 9-year difference between Sequoia and his son. They probably have different mothers.
Yeah.
Sequoia's mom is probably much younger than Wayne. But when Wayne became abusive, she was out of there. And his abusiveness is why he doesn't have any sort of custody, and she kind of allows him to have these very short, unsupervised visits in public settings with Sequoia. But yeah, Wayne, of the 3 people, he's probably the one we learn the least about directly. A lot of it you have to infer.
Yeah, it's like this sense of like dread and heaviness that lingers in the air when when we're dealing with him. And it's also just, despite the fact that because to me, I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, I feel like maybe Wayne probably doesn't have a place to live. That's why he's shacking up with her.
Yeah.
He's had this repeated pattern where he meets up with someone, he lives with them for a while.
Well, I imagine it's like sleeping on a buddy's couch or something if
Yeah.
he's not at Janet's.
And that, like, for Janet is this sense of power, but at the same time,
There's a threat.
there's this threat, but she's also so unwilling to protect Lacey from this.
Well, and then we'll talk about Regina, who's our middle person,
Mhm.
played by Sophie Okonedo, I believe, who is a British character actress who has a very familiar face. I don't know if I've seen any of the things she's been in, but as soon as I saw like her face, I was like, I've seen this woman before. But I can't. And then when I looked at the filmography, I was like, I don't think I've seen any of these things though. So
Yeah.
maybe I've seen her face in trailers or clips or something. What did you think of Regina and the role she plays in Janet and Lacey's life?
I mean, again, it is a thing where Janet has the upper hand. Regina is recently broken up with Avi. They were together, and she is leaving him. She is starting her life again, and
She's very much like a foil to Janet. They are
Yes.
following similar paths, making slightly different choices.
yes, and it feels like at first you're just like, oh, this is a good thing, until Janet just kind of fucks it up, I would say.
Yeah.
Because she can't deal with the fact that, like, she has someone else that's kind of like contradicting
Well,
what she's thinking or saying.
and of the three, Lacey becomes the closest with Regina, I would
Yes.
say. Because the whole conversation they have sitting in the car is a very interesting conversation where Lacey kind of opens up a little bit to Regina.
Yeah, and it's because, like, Regina asks her questions. Like Wayne, no, like Wayne, for example,
Doesn't really interact.
answer,
He doesn't
or
interact.
even ask questions.
Yeah.
He doesn't interact with her. Regina has the most interaction with her, like trying to set this bond, because she's kind of like, well, if I'm going to live with you guys, I need to be able to be around you as much as we're going to be.
And which then brings us to Avi, who Avi doesn't ask Lacey questions. Avi just likes to talk.
Yes.
He likes to hold court.
Yes.
And he wants Lacey to be impressed with how smart he is. That's one of the, and he wants Janet to be impressed with how smart he
Yeah.
is. What did you think of the Avi character played by Elias Koteas, who's been in a ton of things?
Thought it was such an interesting segment of sorts because of how that all just kind of wraps up.
Yeah, there's no big climaxes.
No, but it's also like, again, it is the moment that we see that Lacey goes, I'm done. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
Because she gets the invitation to go on a picnic with them. And how the mom's like, and Avi really wants you to go. And she's like, I would rather not do that.
Yeah.
It is it's like, in a sense, without any really heavy emotion, it's like the point where Lacey's like, I'm done forming any attachments to the people that my mom is forming attachments with.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, she's like,
Avi's like the nail in the coffin.
Yes.
And going back to the relationship between Lacey and Janet, the vibe I got was that the daughter is simply there while mom lives her life.
Yeah.
The film constantly shows situations where the mother doesn't take the daughter into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
She constantly fails to realize how important her child is. But then we'll have these moments where she's so hyper-focused on Lacey, only to then be distracted by the next person that's kind of coming through, where you'll just see these scenes where she's kind of like, she babies Lacey in a weird way, the whole falling asleep, and Lacey has to hold her hand while they fall asleep.
Well, it's also like the way that, like, she'll say no, and then Lacey's
Do it
like,
anyway.
a minute.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Janet can't set boundaries, even with her own daughter, when it's like, well, setting a boundary with your daughter who feels that she needs to sleep with you and hold your hand would probably be a good thing. And you would counterbalance denying her that by being a better parent in the waking hours.
Yeah, it's like this also, it's like at night is the only time that she has her mother to herself.
Yeah.
And like this thing of it being like we watch Lacey go to piano lessons. We watch Lacey try to show her mom, look what I've done. And the mom's like, that's nice, whatever.
Well, she gets a little like teary near the end
Yeah.
because she hears her like play this piece and is like very good at it.
Yeah.
And you can see that she kind of appreciates it, but then without saying the final scene of the movie, it just feels like Janet, it doesn't, nothing sinks in, nothing sticks.
No.
Um, there's a moment where they're laying there at night and she treats Lacey, of course, like her therapist.
Terrible.
And Janet says she has always, this is to her 11-year-old daughter, says she's always had this knowledge that she could make any man fall in love with her if she really tried, and that she thinks maybe it's ruined her life. And I just thought of, if you're telling this to your 11-year-old daughter, the question I have was, what does this do to redefine the concept of love for 11-year-old Lacey and her idea of relationships? Because she's introducing this idea of making someone fall in love with you, that love is a manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're 11 years old, I think the movie, it does a really good job of capturing this, the loneliness of childhood.
Yes.
Specifically that bridge between childhood to adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have your mother say to you or present you with the idea that love is a thing that you trick people into. And then her observing her mother interacting with all these people and the way Janet will grow up and how will she, what will her relationships look like, right?
Lacey grows
Yeah,
up.
yeah. When Janet grows up, when Lacey grows up, how will her relationships look and how will this summer influence those? And I just can't imagine Lacey doing very well, at least at first, trying to have like a close romantic relationship with anyone. Because it's like, what kind of person is she going to go after? Is she going to be like her mother and seek out these like, these kinds of people?
It's also just the conversations that are had afterwards that are just heart-wrenching. And the reason that I'm not going to mention the details is just sort of like,
you got to like hear it in the moment and
it's
experience the
these
film. Yeah.
confessions that Lacey has, and her mother doesn't go like deeper into it. It's like she has to add these comments. And again, it is like she forgets your child is 11 years old. There's a difference between the both of you. Your child is allowed to have an emotional immaturity and selfishness because she's a child. But for her to have it echoed back at her, this selfishness, this immaturity is not good for her to go through, because then she's the one offering Lacey, who's again 11, offering sage information that she won't be able to absorb. Because her own mother can't fucking take it.
Or that like it's not even sage information, it's bullshit. That Janet thinks I'm being a good mom by giving quote unquote advice to my daughter. I think the film did a really good job. Zoe Ziegler, who plays Lacey, is such a strong child actor. I feel like we're living in an era with some really good child actors right now.
Yeah.
I think she captures the impulsive reactions of being a kid in social situations.
Yeah.
So either wanting to withdraw when it's awkward, or in the case of Sequoia, wanting to make your life about someone you just met.
Yeah.
Because she's hangs out with Sequoia for like, what, 2 hours or something? And then she's like, I love Sequoia. I want to hang out with her. And like, even when Wayne leaves, Lacey goes, does this mean I won't be able to hang out with Sequoia? Because she's so desperate to find a connection with a peer.
Yes.
Because she does not want to be Janet's peer, but Janet treats her like a fellow traveler rather than a dependent, which is what she is. I thought aesthetically, having grown up in rural Tennessee, there was a lot about the look and vibe of this movie I could connect with.
Mm-hmm.
There's a profound sense of place in the movie. Like, even if you've never been to this part of Massachusetts, you can like feel it.
Yeah, and the shots were beautifully done. Things were beautifully centered.
Well, apparently there's like hundreds of hours of sound design that was done of just going out into the woods and recording. And I think it pays off in the movie because when they're out on the back deck or they're, walking up the driveway, the sound of the cicadas, just the sound of like nature around them is so strong. And it gives you that sense of just kind of lazily wandering through summer.
Yeah.
Right? Would you recommend Janet Planet to our audience?
Yes, I would.
Strongly recommend?
Strongly
Perfect.
recommend.
I would say if you're interested in watching something that takes its time, but doesn't move too slowly, and really says a lot of profound, accurate things about being a human. I don't know how accurate this is in the female experience. You'd have to speak to that.
I think it's pretty accurate. I think there was tidbits that reminded me of sitting in conversations or capturing conversations that my mom would have with her girlfriends. Obviously, there's more that Lacey captured than I would have been allowed to, because at a certain point I would have been told, like, go to your room, go watch TV. And but I could identify to that loneliness, that inability to find someone just as awkward and as strange as you are, and then not wanting to be a part of the adult world, but being stuck there because there's no one else like you or around your age.
Yeah, and I would say that Annie Baker is becoming a director who I'm very interested to see what she does next. As artificial intelligence reigns, emotions have become a threat to get rid of. Gabrielle must purify her DNA by diving back into her past lives. She finds a great love there as well as a bad feeling. This is The Beast, a film written and directed by Bertrand Bonello. I don't know how you pronounce his name in French. He's a French director. I'm not familiar with his work other than there's a film Nocturama, which I have not seen, but I heard about. The film stars Léa Seydoux as Gabrielle and George McKay as Lewis, who are the two central characters. There's other people that come in and out of the movie, but none of them are as important as Gabrielle and Lewis in the story. So, Ariana, what were your just initial thoughts about this movie?
I think it's an interesting film. It's one of those films that I immediately thought to myself, like, oh, this is for us to see their acting chops.
It does,
Like,
yeah, there's kind of an acting showcase.
yes. Especially by Léa Seydoux.
Yeah, Léa Seydoux.
Léa Seydoux.
Léa Seydoux.
Léa Seydoux.
There you got it.
I feel like even the initial first scene,
Which feels very detached from the rest of the movie, but
yeah,
it's thematically connected.
and I think it's also it's like this. I think it's a sort of a finger waggle towards how the industry works of
The
sorts
film
now.
industry.
Yeah, while also displaying her acting chops and then being like, it's going to be a scene that's going to be seen afterwards in the film. So
She basically redoes that scene in different contexts.
yes, so I don't know if it's supposed to be like, this is what the character has done and doesn't realize it's being repeated, or like them being like, hey guys, this is a movie.
Well, and he does an interesting thing of playing with expectation through editing. He makes quite a bit of use of video artifacting, like digital video artifacting, where a scene kind of dissolves and crumbles, which I thought was interesting. I really haven't seen anybody do that before. Now, the movie, I found out some things, and I think my view on the movie has improved since I learned some more things about it. And you know how this podcast is. It's the Ariana turnaround we love to do.
Okay, but this time I did dislike the film, so I'm wondering if you're like...
I think I can improve your liking of it.
Okay, go ahead.
So it's loosely based on a Henry James novella called The Beast in the Jungle. Henry James, while you may have not read any of his work, you are familiar with at least one adaptation of his work, The Innocents, with Deborah Kerr, based on The Turn of the Screw. Okay. She's the governess to the two children whose uncle kind of doesn't want to take care of them.
Yeah.
There were domestic workers at the house who murder-suicide, possibly,
Yeah.
and their ghosts are haunting the children and kind of possessing the children. So that's Henry James.
Okay.
So The Beast in the Jungle is a psychological novella about a man named John Marcher who is consumed by the anticipation of a catastrophic event that he believes is destined to happen in his life, only to realize too late that his fear of the unknown has caused him to miss out on life and love. So that's the premise of that novel, this sort of living in impending fear and doom of a thing that hasn't happened yet.
Kind of like the way our lives are.
Yeah.
All the time.
Will it happen? Is it a real thing to be afraid of? Like, that's what's going on here. I think the film, to me, shared a lot of aesthetic similarities with Cloud Atlas, but also Kogonada's After Yang.
Yes.
Where this is contemplative humanist science fiction. Okay. So it's a film that I believe at its core is about our perceived fears of what is to come, which cause us to ignore the immediacy of the present. Would you agree with that reading of it?
Yeah, that is completely what it is about, especially with the fears that the characters keep repeating that they have.
Well, Gabrielle specifically, that we do see some from Lewis in different time periods.
Where they switch up.
Yeah. So the film takes place over 3 time periods, 1910, 2014, and 2044. It's framed through the 2024 portion, which is where Gabrielle is going through a program where it's been deemed that AI has kind of taken over the world.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that AI has identified as a problem is that humans are deemed useless and incapable of making decisions due to their emotions. And so the way to deal with that is a purification of your DNA in order to be your best self and purge you of the emotions left over from past lives. It's Scientology.
Yeah.
This is a critique of Scientology, I think, on one level. That's not what the whole thing. But I think he was probably inspired by reading about, thetans and auditing and all of that from Scientology. And his grand thesis is essentially that if you live in fear of things that have yet to come and you try to purge your emotion in order to deal with that thing that's never come, you will not live. And I think that's what we see in the movie, that life is both beautiful and tragic, and that it's us coming to terms with that fact that allows us to live. And that what happens to Gabrielle is she never allows herself to live in the 2044 timeline. She's constantly stuck in trying to wrestle with the emotions that she's carried with her from these past events. And by seeing the past events, we see that any tragedy that might have been caused was kind of linked to this same thing that goes back to the Henry James novella. This fear of a thing that hasn't happened instead of just dealing with what's happening right now. And you're staring at me.
Just a calm stare.
Okay.
I don't think like it's in the wrong. I think it's that mix of I wouldn't call it
is your
expectation.
Is your critique more aesthetic than it is? Okay.
I'm talking about like story wise.
Okay.
It's this interesting thing of also like when it came to the 2014 like timeline.
Well, first, which of the 3 do you find the most interesting? Because in a way, it's kind of a chopped up anthology movie.
I think it's just I think it's more interesting when you have the whole 3 stories together.
So you find that alone they aren't as strong as they are with the connections.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because if we're going to separate them alone, then there's just going to be like some good things and some bad things, and some things that you'd probably be like, why include that to begin with? I think it just like within the first storyline is like this interesting thing where 1910, she's married, she is deeply in love with her husband. She finds herself with Louis, who they've known each other like 6 years ago, had divulged certain informations and are like,
it kind of felt like Alain Resnais's Last Year at Marienbad a little bit.
Yeah.
Where it's like a couple reunited and we don't get to see that initial meeting, but we're focused on the reunion.
And it's this thing of it being like, as like he is like, you should be with me, like, are you more like, what is the bigger feeling? Is your fear stronger? What is stronger, your love for me or your fear? And to me, it was like indicating from what I was reading from the film, like it had nothing to do with her fear. It had to do with the fact that she loved her husband, and was like, I'm not willing to sacrifice for a life unknown, only for the tragedy to really come despite that.
When I think part of that is in the 1910 story, there is a massive social tragedy that happens,
Yeah.
the catastrophe. And I think part of it might be that it's supposed to be, and that fear that was established then followed her through all these lives.
Yeah. And I think it's almost like this indication of it just being like, no matter what like aspect of time that you're living in, there's going to be something to be fearful of. And it's this strange thing that even though he's like, what is it that you're afraid, like this impending doom, somehow she's not afraid of these floods that are coming in and are causing a problem. That's not it. It's like this unnamed thing that she feels like is a shadow over her life, while also just being like, these confessions that she made 6 years ago feels like something that a 20-something-year-old would say when they're anxious about entering adulthood, right? Like, especially if you haven't had the ability to have multiple relationships or like an emotional like maturity. Sometimes we dwell into, oh, I'm disappointed so badly in life, or I don't want to try. Something horrible is going to happen to me, so like, of course, that's why I should never try. Versus like the 2014,
where it's Louis is the one who lives in anticipation of the disaster.
yes, while she is like willing to be there for him, but it's also like the lack of conversation, like the lack of trust in one another. And then
Well, it's interesting, the 2014 one. Well, each of the different periods is a different genre, which I
yes.
thought was interesting. 1910 is essentially like a period drama romance. 2014 is a psychological thriller. And then 2044 is this science fiction dystopia.
Yeah.
And the 2014 one is very obvious that Louis, the way he's being played in that one, he's based on Elliot Rodger, who was some incel dude that murdered a woman who had rejected him, and he recorded this like manifesto video of him making all these like insane rants about, you know, women and how they reject you and they just manipulate you and all of this. And what I found interesting about that was how he has prophesied a horrible thing, and whenever there's an opportunity to subvert that horrible thing from happening, he refuses it because he's invested so much of his identity in the horrible thing.
Yeah.
That he can't imagine the world. He can't imagine that he was wrong. And this is something I think I see in like contemporaneously, is it is far safer apparently for some people, even though it doesn't make much sense, to cling to a belief that has been proven wrong and will just continue to be wrong, because you would have to admit that you were wrong. And I keep trying to find like where in, and I'm sure I don't know if this is outside of, you know, Western civilization or outside of the United States, but I keep trying to figure out, when did this become a thing where to admit you were wrong is worse than just following through with something that's stupid and is going to destroy you? And I don't know where that comes from. I don't know the root of that.
Yeah, there's so many mixtures that you can add to it that would explain. I feel like TV, like religious people, were a start to that, because it went from doing apologies in order to show the love of Christ and how it'll wash you clean and how all of us are sinners, to, well, the Lord has never steered me wrong to begin with, and I was listening to his word the whole time.
I think it is fascism.
Yeah.
Because a fascist believes in a hierarchical superiority, and you can't ever admit you're wrong to someone that you believe is lower than you in this imagined hierarchy. And so for him, women are beneath him. So when a woman actually offers a chance to have the sort of relationship he keeps claiming he can't have, he can't accept it because then that would mean he's been wrong this whole time. And if he's invested so much of himself in being wrong, then that means he might be quote unquote stupid. And he won't admit that he's stupid, right? When I think there's a freedom in being able to just go, I don't know. I don't know what's right. I make decisions based on what I think is correct. And I try to do everything I can to not harm or exploit others to the best of my ability, rather than everything I think is right, everything I know I'm right, I'm never wrong, everyone else is wrong kind of thing. And I think I think that mentality is such a key piece of the movie, is just letting go of your neuroses as a way to free yourself and to live.
Yeah.
2014.
2014. No, that's the one that like it's supposed to be him. You mean like 2044?
So I'm talking about 2014. There's more to talk about, I think, there.
Okay.
The vibe I got was a very Lynchian vibe. Almost kind of like Mulholland Drive.
You mean the one where he's like, oh, women.
Elliot Rodger, yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily that part. It was, I think, stuff she was doing, being the actress who was trying to like get work. And it was just, there was something very unreal about it. While it was grounded aesthetically, there was just a sense of like surreality.
For example, like the music,
the doll.
And then like the doll that
let's talk about the doll motif in this movie, because there's dolls present in every timeline, but not all in the same way. 1910, Gabrielle's husband owns a doll making factory.
Yeah.
In 2014, she has this weird like cyber pet doll thing that doesn't speak English. It just kind of babbles and its face moves. And then in 2044 is the most realized, which is Kelly, who is a android companion that is partnered with her after she undergoes this DNA purification thing. Because do you remember the specifics about, like, was the DNA purification not going to work for Gabrielle? Is that what it was?
Towards the end, it doesn't work for her.
Because she realized she has like some sort of rare condition.
Yeah.
Right? What do you think's going on with the dolls in this movie? Because that was one thing that I'm still trying to figure out. What does that mean? What are we supposed to derive from that, other than just connective tissue?
I think it was just connective tissue, especially because the 2014 one, it wasn't as if like it had any cameras. I don't know if like the doll belonged to the owner of the house. There was like no really clear indication as to why she needed to keep the doll close.
Yeah, because it's in 2044. What do you think of the role that the Kelly android plays?
Well, I think the Kelly, it's supposed to be a caretaker because of like the purification is so much. She should not be left alone as she is like purging these emotions.
But it's a world where human connection seems very sparse.
Yes.
So you have to have the android, I guess. What did you think of that actress? I'm going to try to pronounce the name and I might get it wrong, but I'm going to go for it. Guzlaji Malanda. I hope maybe I got it right. Who we first saw in Saint-Omer as the person being prosecuted in that film for the murder of her child.
Yeah.
What did you think of that actress's performance as Kelly? And what did you think of what Kelly added to the story?
I mean, I liked her performance. I think she's probably a very strong actress. It was an odd chemistry between her and Leia. Like it was, especially because it's supposed to be that like Gabrielle just has like this sense of like, I don't like you. You're not real. You're just a doll.
And Kelly's whole interaction always felt very transactional, where it was sort of the way you interact with AI, where it's designed to just basically give you whatever it is you want.
Yeah.
And so Kelly's like constantly seems to be asking Gabrielle, like, at one point she's like, do you want to have sex? Like, what do you want to do?
Yeah. But there's also this moment that, for example, Kelly tells her, like, I had my first dream yesterday.
Yeah, that part stuck out to me quite a bit.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be like she's excited to having
But it's a vision
Yeah.
because she foresees the final scene of the movie.
And what was like? Did she say?
She said, "I see you in a club and no one else is there. It's just you and a man."
Yes.
And that stuck out to me as what is that implying that this artificial intelligence is taking up the role of what humans seem to have once had in the world, and that humans are going to, because like you think of Louis' fate at the end of the movie, there's almost a subversion of the androids and the humans, right? For the humans to be more efficient, they have to become more like the androids, but the androids are inevitably becoming more like the humans.
Yeah.
And so going back to the initial premise of the film, which is fearing of a thing that hasn't happened yet, with Kelly, she's starting to anticipate her own things. Before, she was kept asking Gabrielle, "What do you want?" She just was, "Give me your request and I'll fulfill it." And now Kelly is envisioning things that might occur or might not. Because we could also say, yeah, I mean, the thing that she imagined was not that complex.
Yeah, it's also this interesting thing that like the repetition of certain things. Like it's not as if every timeline has like exactly the same things, but like they always have at least one or two that are aligned together.
It feels like it's bleeding through.
And it is this thing of how Gabrielle is disconnected from others around her. She doesn't have any female companionship. And like we can't really say that like Kelly is a female companion of sorts because she's constantly reminding Kelly like you are a doll. And she yearns for it, but she won't get it because the two, like it's these times that where she's at the dance floor, she sees this woman, she asks to sit with them, and they're kind of like, we are done with our emotions. We've done. They're kind of like their attitude is we've done and seen everything. Why would we hang out with you?
Yeah.
And it's as if like despite this remark before about her being not this very emotional person, it's as if like they can tell something's off with her. And that because she kind of like is put this weird premonition upon herself, I think it's sort of like the tragedy is going to occur no matter what, even though she's been given different signs as to like, hey, don't go this route. Don't go this route, or don't do this. It's not good for you. Because when you think about like the 2014 one, it's the constant call from the owner being like, there's someone snooping around the house. Should I call someone to? No, I'm fine. I'm fine. It's okay. Like she lets
the owner seems to be anticipating something horrible.
She lets it in. Or like there is a moment that afterwards during the purification, they tell her, you know, you really shouldn't go seek this person out. It seems as if you two have a complicated history and that it's not good for you. But she seeks it out.
One last note on the dolls, and then I'm going to tie it into another thread that goes through all these.
Okay.
What we're seeing with the dolls is in 1910, humans are making the dolls.
Yeah.
In 2014, the dolls and the humans coexist. In 2024, the dolls are making the humans. And so it's an inversion, right? It's this flipping of things, which I think is interesting. But I also think there's another thing that the dolls intersect with by the end of the movie. And we see this in 1910, we see it in 2014, is Gabrielle seeking out the advice of a medium, a psychic. What did you think of that character's role in the film? Do you have any insights personally you think of what that was meant to be? If the theme of the film is this sort of being consumed by anticipation of bad things, are they trying to say that psychics fuel that? Or psychics just tell you what it is they read off of you? Because I would say that Kelly, the android, becomes the psychic in 2044, because she's the one who conveys to Gabrielle the final scene of the movie.
Yeah.
And then think about the psychic she goes to in Paris. That's the one that seems the most mundane and kind of normal. The one in 2014, that felt very Lynchian to me
Yeah.
and very strange
Mm-hmm.
and felt otherworldly.
Yeah.
Because that's paired with which came out of left field, clips from Harmony Korine's Trash Humpers. Which, if for the unfamiliar, Harmony Korine is a sort of indie director. He wrote the controversial 90s film Kids. He went on to write and direct several very odd films like Julian Donkey Boy and Gummo. And then he made a film called Trash Humpers, which was filmed in and around Nashville. He's a Nashville native, or not Nashville native, but he lives there. And it was he and some other actors who would put on old people masks and then just kind of behave strangely out in public. And so there's a moment where Gabrielle, she's looking up an actress, I think maybe one that she met, because you look up an actress and she's on the actress's website and it has like a reel of performances and there's Trash Humpers things there. And Gabrielle is just very like disturbed. And it was very interesting to me because that, along with like the sequences with the psychic in 2014, felt like they didn't necessarily push the narrative forward, but they established an atmosphere that put that sense of dread in you.
Yeah.
And so because Gabrielle has tragedy befall her in 1910, right? Tragedy befalls her again in 2014. And in both of those instances, it's in pursuit and interaction with Louis.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to me that in 2044, she still seeks out Louis.
Mm-hmm.
Because you would think there would be a trend here of it just seems like the two of you are not meant to be together. That every time you cross paths, you feel this draw, but it never turns out well. So is this the universe plotting against you and you should be together? Or is it that you're not compatible and the universe is trying to course correct?
It's also this thing of it being like, or are you the person who ends up ultimately giving you that tragedy that you said that has been chasing you all of your life?
That we are the architects of our own tragedy. So the thing sort of, if we go back to the Henry James novel, a man who's consumed by this anticipation and then realizes too late that the fear of the unknown has caused him to like miss out on living. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that Gabrielle cannot articulate, is that what she's afraid of is that her life will come to an end and she will have not been able to live it to her fullest, because we see at least two timelines where she dies tragically young.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that she fears. It's just so buried inside of her. She hasn't realized it until the end of the movie when it's far too late for her to do anything about it, which is there's the tragedy again.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add about The Beast?
It's like, I don't want to say like it's bizarre. I think it's a very interesting film.
It's an offbeat film that I don't think it will surprise anyone who's used to more mainstream cinema, but it's still a very digestible movie.
Yeah, like it's one where it's an actor showcase because the guy plays Louis George McKay does amazing.
Three very different roles.
3 different roles, 3 fucking different accents. He switches in like the 1910. They switch between like French and English. So they're mixing tongues, as they say, before they end up doing that, like, which almost is like a sense of like romance during it. But then like the middle, like the 2014 starts to feel like icky.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the last bit, you're kind of like tragic. And you're just sort of like, but it's also this thing of you want to tell Gabrielle, like, there's nothing you seem to enjoy though.
Yeah. But I mean, once again, that goes back to the source material, right? It's about someone who can't enjoy life.
Yeah, and it's not like, it's such a huge leap from like the 1910 one, because she's a musician, she loves her husband.
She's a much more warm person.
Yes. And then like in 2014, she's like in confusion as to why she came to Los Angeles when things aren't working out, and she's working as a model, but she's not working as an actress, and she wishes that she would.
I would say that period is more, confusion.
Yeah.
And then when you get to 2044, it's very much this sort of like ennui, this kind of ambient depression about existence.
Yeah, and so on the 2044 one, you're almost wanting to be like, is it part of you is almost you want that ending. You want that tragedy and now it's been taken away. Is that the tragedy for you? Or
Yeah,
is
that
it
now she'll have to live, for the first time, she's going to have to live the full extent of her life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's when you anticipate, like, oh, I'm always going to die young, then I don't have to worry about the future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is fucked up because
Yeah.
it's like she is removed and it's like, but she wants that heightened passion.
Which, when you think of, I think there are some people for who they see things like COVID and this sort of apocalyptic shift as like a blessing, right? Because they don't have to grow old. They don't have to become infirm. They don't have to become disabled.
Yeah,
They
but
die beautiful
But I
and
think it's
tragically.
also like this thing that I feel like that we have been experiencing, either we want to remark it or not, is like because we have this looming threat, we don't want to go enjoy things.
Oh, very much.
And
Yeah.
it's sort of like, we have a family trip going on, and it's like, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? And it's almost like, and
You're
it's
never in the moment. You're always anticipating the bad moment.
exactly, and it's like,
And it's so hard to not.
yeah, because it's like,
Because
for
like,
example, we had a conversation in the kitchen while you're just like, this is the reason why I don't want to travel. And I was just like, and I'm not being like, oh, you're not like, it's not that you're wrong. It's just sort of like,
how do you, I think what it is, how do you grapple with the truth of suffering,
yes,
but still find joy in life, even when you know that, like, because I mean, it goes back to just basically being human. We all know we're going to die. Like, I don't know how it will happen for me. I don't know how it will happen for you, anyone. But at some point, your existence will end. And that can be a horror to think about. We see a
Yeah.
lot of emotionally immature Silicon Valley types who want to like inject themselves with baby blood. But the thing is, but die, you also have to go, dying is a part of being human. It's of function in the same way that being born is, and eating and having sex and learning and growing physically. And so death and what is to come has been so mystified, I think,
yeah,
which is what this movie is kind of about, that it inhibits us from being alive. And I don't know how you do that. It would have to be kind of sort of a cultural revolution of having more conversations about death
yeah,
and talking about, openly about, yeah, I'm afraid when I die because of these reasons. Because I sometimes think, I mean, I think about death a lot. But I think of it in terms as, will I feel regret when I die? Will I be angry that there's going to be movies I have not seen when I die that I will have heard about my whole life, right? Just because that's how it is. And how will I feel when I get to the moment? Will I even care about those things? That's the thing, is I can care about them now because I'm dying, but I'm not at the end of the process.
but it's also like this weird thing when you think about it. You're also speaking about material, right?
Yeah.
Without meaning to. It's not as if
Well, because of course I'd be like, well, yeah, I don't want to die because then I couldn't be with my wife.
and it's like,
But
instead
then
of being like, oh, well, did I have fun? Did I love all
Yeah.
the people that I love? You're just like, did I watch all the movies?
Fuck you. How about that? How about this? Will I be upset that I did not see all the art I possibly could in my life? Because
Yeah,
I think
understandable.
I think to see and experience art is an important part of being alive, because it helps you connect with people, because you understand parts of them that they're willing to share with you through their art.
Yeah, and I think it's also movies in a sense show us how other people live and what their beliefs are and what their emotions are without having to
Well, because
sit down and do 20 questions.
Well, I mean, because I could get into the even heavier things that would be fears at death of what will happen to all of the my nieces and nephew.
Yeah.
That's a fear, right? What will happen to all of the students that I taught who will be, well into their adult years when I die, hopefully, that you're like, I don't know how life turns out for them. I won't know. I just will not be privy to it.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, the interesting thing is, like, going back to the movie, Gabrielle is in 2044. Um, she has again these looming worries. Like, for example, Kelly cannot go with her to take her home because they tell her that Kelly's going through some procedures, and she's like, "Is it serious?" And the AI voice is like, "Nothing is serious. Like, nothing is serious anymore." They're like, it is so, they're almost like indicating to her, like, it is rare for people to be sick and for them not to find a solution. And that when they deliver at the end, like, "Oh, you can't be purified the way that we wish. We are so sorry. You are in this way minority." And she's okay with it up until
The
she
ending.
sees Louis.
No.
And it's sort of like this interesting thing that, like, is it the tragedy that she thought she would, again, end her life early, but now she has to live her life and find meaning and do something with that life.
And that's the horror that she had hoped to avoid. Because she knew that based on these past lives, if she and Louis hooked up, something would happen and they would die.
Because now Louis doesn't have that.
Yeah, and now Louis, his path has been completely separate from her.
Yeah,
now.
his passion is gone.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a very big movie about like a lot of ideas, but I still think it's a very accessible movie.
Yeah.
It's just told in a way that will surprise the audience, I think. Just the way the structure is laid out and the way Bonello plays with editing, especially. The editing in this movie has some very interesting choices and like very key moments.
Yeah.
He kind of like hides things from you in order to protect you from like the brunt of how bad it could be. Would you recommend The Beast to our audience?
Yeah, I would.
It's available for streaming on Criterion if you're subscribed to that. And probably, I'm going to guess, if not already in the typical places you would rent things from, it will be coming up there. But yeah, very interesting movie that is unlike many movies I think you'll see in 2024. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure that you check our show notes for all the important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to be notified wherever it is you listen to podcasts so that you'll be notified when new episodes are up. On the net, or if you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find we're in the middle of a series about the atomic bombing of Japan. Coming up this next week, we'll be doing reviews of the 80s kind of surreal mystery horror kind of movie, Miracle Mile. We're following that up with a very dark Japanese drama, Black Rain, about the aftermath of the bombing. And we'll be finishing up next week, not the series, but with the Christopher Nolan film Oppenheimer. If you enjoy what we do on the podcast or over on the blog, we would encourage you to support us on Patreon. We have different reward levels for you to choose from. You get different things based on how much you donate. I want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who donate at the Writers Room level. At that level, you get to pick a movie every month. We watch it, review it. You can include your own thoughts if you wish. No matter what level you donate to on Patreon, you will get access to our exclusive patron podcasts. We've got about 3 or 4 different series up there right now. And we have a new one that we're currently working on, recording, editing, getting ready, that will be about romantic comedies. Well, on the next episode of Pop Cult Podcast, we will be doing reviews of the German drama, The Teacher's Lounge, as well as the film festival hit, The People's Joker. You keep listening, we'll keep watching.